My brother-in-law manipulated my terminally ill husband into cutting me out of his $250,000 life insurance policy and naming him the beneficiary instead, claiming I would just remarry and blow the money. So I sued him, clawed back every cent plus 50 grand in legal fees, and then opened a competing auto repair shop right across the street that put his garage out of business within 2 years. I let him lose everything. Before we get into this, drop where you're listening from and your local time in the comments. I read everyone. I'm Claire, and I'm 33 years old. I live in Akron, Ohio. And I am the woman who watched a man I trusted steal $250,000 from my husband's deathbed, only to hand it back to me under court order so I could use that same money to dismantle his entire life, brick by brick. People ask me all the time if I planned it that way from the beginning, if the revenge was the conscious goal. It wasn't. The revenge wasn't a strategy. It was the natural, almost inevitable result of me finally deciding to stop being a doormat and start building something for myself. But to understand how it all unfolded, you have to understand the family dynamics that were already in place long before my husband Jack got sick. Because before cancer entered our vocabulary, I was already the designated scapegoat in every room I walked into. I come from a very traditional, image-obsessed family in the suburbs of Toledo, Sylvania Township to be exact. My parents, Bill and Linda, had 2 daughters, me and my younger sister, Emily. Emily was the golden child from the moment she took her first breath, and I do not mean that in some jealous, exaggerated way. I mean there is objective evidence. My mom has a scrapbook for Emily that's 3 inches thick, packed with every report card, every ballet recital program, every newspaper clipping from when Emily made the honor roll at Southview High School, every ribbon from the science fair where she won 2nd place. My scrapbook, which she started because she felt guilty when my grandmother asked about it, has my birth announcement cut from the local paper and a single Polaroid from my 8th grade graduation where I'm mid-blink and a third of my head is cut off. That's it. That is the entire record of my childhood milestones, according to my mother. Emily was the one with the perfect grades, the perfect hair, the perfect smile that earned her a full academic ride to Ohio State's Fisher College of Business, while I worked 2 jobs, one at a diner called the Blue Dolphin and one at a daycare, to put myself through a dental assistant certification program at Owens Community College. Mom framed it as, "Emily is just more academically gifted, honey," but the reality was that I was never given a chance to be gifted at anything. I remember once in 10th grade, I got a 3.8 GPA for the semester, and I was so proud I practically skipped into the kitchen to show her. She was folding laundry, a basket of towels on the counter. She glanced at the report card and said, flat as a ruler, "That's nice, but Emily just made high honor roll again with a 4.1. You know, that's the one they put in the program at the awards assembly." She said it while refolding a dish towel, not even making eye contact. My achievements were always measured against Emily's and found lacking. When I struggled with pre-calculus, it was because I was lazy and unfocused and watching too much TV. When Emily got a B in AP history, it was because the teacher was clearly unfair and didn't appreciate her brilliance, and my mother threatened to go to the school board. My dad was mostly absent, a quiet, exhausted man who worked the line at the Jeep assembly plant in Toledo for 33 years, came home, cracked a beer, and melted into his recliner while the TV played whatever was on. He just echoed whatever my mom said, so if she declared me the problem child, he'd nod and say, "Listen to your mother." I learned early that I was the backup kid, the one you called when you needed someone to take the blame for a broken vase, or when Emily needed a designated driver, not the one you bragged about at church or posted on Facebook. Emily could do no wrong. I could do no right. And the worst part was, Emily believed it too. She internalized the hierarchy. She'd look at me with this soft, patronizing little smile and say, "It's okay, Claire, not everyone can be a type of leader. The world needs followers too." She was 2 years younger and talked to me like I was a slow intern she was training. I remember one Christmas, I'd saved up for months to buy our mom a beautiful wool scarf from a boutique downtown, $75, which was a fortune for me. Emily handed her a Tiffany keychain with a little silver heart, and Mom cried actual tears and said, "You always know exactly what I love, Emmy." She draped my scarf over the back of a kitchen chair, and a month later I found it in the donation pile. That was the dynamic in a single moment, so I left. I moved to Akron at 22, right after my certification, because I needed physical distance from the constant comparison. I got a job at a small dental practice called Smile Solutions on West Market Street, a clean, bright office with 4 chairs, and I rented a tiny studio apartment above a dry cleaner on East Tallmadge Avenue for $525 a month. The apartment smelled like industrial solvent, and the hot water heater broke roughly every other week, but it was mine. That apartment, with its slanted floors and the noise of the pressing machines below, was the first space I ever had where nobody was ranking me. That's where I met Jack. He came in one Tuesday as a new patient, nervous, gripping the intake clipboard so hard his knuckles were white. He needed a root canal and was absolutely terrified of dentists, like full-on phobia, sweating through his shirt. He was so handsome, messy brown hair, kind brown eyes with little crinkles at the corners, an apologetic half-smile. The dentist asked me to sit with him and calm him down before the procedure. I pulled up the little rolling stool, sat next to him, and just talked. I asked about his job, his hobbies, his favorite music, anything to get his mind off the drill. He made a joke about how he'd rather be literally anywhere else, maybe even a monster truck rally, and I laughed. By the time his cleaning was done, I'd written my number on a sticky note and tucked it into his appointment reminder card. He called me that night at 7:13, and we talked for 4 hours about everything and nothing. We started dating, and I quickly realized we were mirrors of each other. Jack was the scapegoat in his own family in a painfully similar way. He had an older brother, Rick, who was the golden boy. Rick was everything their father wanted: burly, mechanically inclined, took over the family auto repair shop, Rick's automotive, right out of high school. Jack was the bookish one, the artist, who dreamed of being a graphic designer. His dad called it coloring for a living and never missed a chance to mock him. Every Thanksgiving dinner at their parents' house, his father would lean back and ask, "You still playing with crayons, son?" and laugh like it was the greatest punchline ever written. His mother, a thin, churchy woman named Diane, always took Rick's side. She made excuses for Rick's temper, Rick's arrogance, Rick's habit of putting Jack down at every family gathering. Jack was expected to drop everything and help with a brake job on a Saturday because Rick wanted to go golfing. Jack was the one told to be the bigger person when Rick borrowed money and never paid it back. Rick once borrowed $800 from Jack for a truck part, swore he'd repay it in 2 weeks, and 2 years later, Jack never saw a dime. When Jack mentioned it once at a family dinner, Rick laughed and said, "Consider it your contribution to the family legacy, bro." Their mom nodded and passed the mashed potatoes. So when Jack and I found each other, it felt like we'd finally found someone who understood the bone-deep exhaustion of being invisible. We got married at 25 in a small ceremony in a park in Cuyahoga Falls, under a giant old oak tree with about 20 friends. Neither family helped with the costs. My mom said they were saving for Emily's future wedding and couldn't spare anything, even though my dad's pension and Social Security were steady. Jack's parents said they had just put a new roof on the house and money was tight, even though Rick had gotten full bankroll from them a month earlier to buy a new tow truck for his business. We didn't care. We had each other. I wore a simple white sundress. Jack wore a blue button-down, and we said our vows with the wind rustling the leaves. It was perfect. For a while, life was beautiful and ordinary. I worked my way up at Smile Solutions, eventually earning $22 an hour with decent benefits and a 401k match. Jack landed a job as a junior graphic designer at a marketing firm downtown called Beacon Creative, making around $48,000 a year. We rented a little 2-bedroom bungalow on Merriman Road in North Hill, with a huge fenced yard and a wide front porch with a swing. We adopted a fat orange cat from the Humane Society and named him Piston, because Jack always said we'd restore a classic muscle car together one day, and the cat's purr was so loud it sounded like a small engine idling. We painted the kitchen a butter yellow and planted tomatoes in the backyard. We were ridiculously happy. I started to believe I had finally escaped the shadow of being the lesser daughter, but the dynamics with both our families never completely vanished. They just went underground, ready to pop up like weeds. My mom would still call every Sunday afternoon and compare my life to Emily's, who by then was a pharmaceutical sales rep for a big company, pulling in 6 figures and engaged to a surgeon named Mark. When I told her we were renting a little house, she said, "Well, when Emily and Dr. Mark buy their house, I'm sure you'll be able to visit." They're looking at a 5-bedroom in Sylvania with a pool. Mark says they need the space for when they start a family. It was always a competition, and I was always losing, even when I wasn't playing. Jack's family was just as bad. Rick was still running the auto shop, now with a big new 6-bay facility on South Arlington Street, a fancy waiting room with leather chairs and a cappuccino machine. He was always belittling Jack for not being a real man, because he didn't know how to change a transmission. At every family gathering, Rick would make some snide comment about how Jack's hands were too soft and that I must be the one wearing the pants. Jack would just smile tightly and change the subject, but I could see it ate at him. Looking back, there were signs I ignored, little moments that should have warned me how deep the cruelty ran in that family. Like the time at a summer barbecue when Rick announced loudly that if Jack ever died, he'd take care of his little wife, but only if I agreed to cook him dinner 3 times a week and maybe do his laundry. Everyone laughed, including Jack's mom, who patted Rick's arm and said, "Oh, you're such a kidder." Or the way Diane would always remind us that the family business was Rick's legacy, and we shouldn't expect any inheritance because Rick worked with his hands and built things, while you two just push papers. She actually said that at Christmas dinner, right after she'd given Rick a $500 gift card to Cabela's and handed me a scented candle from the dollar store. Another time, Rick borrowed Jack's lawnmower and returned it with a shattered blade, and when Jack asked for $50 to replace it, Rick laughed and said, "Think of it as your annual membership fee to the Donovan family." I laughed it off then because what else could I do? I wish I hadn't. The day our world cracked open was a Tuesday in late August, the kind of day where the air is thick and hazy. Jack had been having a persistent cough for months, a dry, hacking sound that kept him up at night and made his ribs ache. I finally convinced him to see Dr. Morrison, our primary care physician. I was at work, setting up trays for a filling, when he called me. His voice was flat in a way I'd never heard before, like all the air had been let out of him. "They found something on the X-ray," he said. "They're sending me for a CT scan at Akron General tomorrow morning." That scan led to a biopsy, which led to a diagnosis that will forever be burned into my memory. Stage 4 non-small cell lung cancer. Non-smoker. No family history. Just a random, cruel biological lightning strike. He was 31 years old. The oncologist, Dr. Harris, was a kind, tired man with graying temples who sat us down in a small room with a diagram of the lungs on the wall and explained it. He said the cancer had already spread to Jack's lymph nodes, his spine, and his ribs. They couldn't cure it. They could only try to slow its march and buy him some time. Maybe a year, maybe 18 months if the treatments worked. He used the word palliative a lot. I remember gripping Jack's hand so hard my fingers went numb, and Jack just stared at the wall, his jaw tight, a single tear sliding down his cheek. We drove home in silence, and when we walked through the front door, we both collapsed into each other on the living room floor and sobbed for an hour. I quit my job that week to become his full-time caregiver. Dr. Patel, my boss at Smile Solutions, was incredibly understanding. She offered to hold my position as long as she could, but we both knew it wasn't a guarantee. I said I'd take the risk. Jack was my entire world. We fought for 18 months. I drove him to chemotherapy at the Cleveland Clinic every other week, a 2-hour round trip in our aging Honda Civic. I sat in the infusion room with him while poison dripped into his veins, the room full of recliners, and the soft beeping of pumps. We played cards or watched old episodes of The Office on my laptop to pass the time. I held his hand through the nausea that would hit so hard he'd be on the bathroom floor for hours, too weak to even lift his head. I learned to give him anti-nausea injections at home, first with shaking hands, then with a steady, practiced motion. I watched his beautiful brown hair fall out in clumps onto his pillow, and I held him while he cried about it, my chest aching with a pain I couldn't fix. I learned how to manage his pain meds, starting with oxycodone and eventually moving to a fentanyl patch and liquid morphine for breakthrough pain. The weakness was the worst. Some days he couldn't get out of bed, and I'd have to half-carry him to the bathroom, his frame so thin I could feel every bone. I learned how to puree his food when the sores in his mouth from chemo made it too painful to chew, blending chicken and vegetables into a bland mush that tasted like nothing but was all he could stomach. We drained our entire savings, about $32,000, on treatments that weren't covered, on special nutrition shakes that cost $40 a case, on co-pays, on a hospital bed we put in the living room so he could see the garden. I sold my car, the Honda Civic, to a neighbor for $3,200, and we used that money to pay for a few months of an experimental immunotherapy that the insurance denied. It bought us 6 extra weeks, according to the doctors. I would sell everything I owned again in a heartbeat for those 6 weeks. During this time, my family was useless. My mom called once a month, always to say, "I'm praying for you, sweetheart," and then immediately launch into a 20-minute update about Emily's wedding plans. The venue at the Toledo Museum of Art, the florist, the string quartet, the custom dress from a designer in New York. She asked me if I'd be able to be a bridesmaid, and I said, "Mom, I'm taking care of my dying husband. I can't think about a wedding right now." She sighed heavily and said, "Well, Emily really wants you there. It would mean so much to her, but I understand if you're just too overwhelmed. You were never great under pressure." No offer to come help, no offer to bring a meal. Emily sent a single text message that said, "Praying for you, babe," with a praying hands emoji, which was about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. My dad didn't call at all. Jack's family was worse. His parents visited maybe 3 times total, always staying just long enough to ensure they could tell their church group they'd done their duty. His mom brought a casserole once, a tuna noodle thing that was still cold in the middle, and then complained that our house was too drafty. Rick surprised me. He actually started showing up more often, maybe every other week, sometimes with a bag of takeout from Swenson's, those little sliders Jack loved, or a 6-pack of beer he wouldn't drink. He'd sit with Jack on the couch and watch old football games from the 80s, laughing about memories from their childhood, like the time they built a treehouse that collapsed during a thunderstorm. I'd hear them laughing from the kitchen, a sound so rare and precious in that house of sickness, and I'd feel a swell of gratitude so big it almost hurt. I thought maybe the crisis had brought them closer, that Rick was genuinely trying to be a good brother. Rick would even help with small things, mowing the lawn, changing a light bulb I couldn't reach, once he came over and fixed a leaking pipe under the kitchen sink without being asked. He'd say, "You just focus on Jack, sis. I got the man's stuff." I was so exhausted, getting maybe 4 hours of sleep a night on a good day, and so grateful for any break, any gesture, that I didn't question it. I didn't see the vulture circling. About 3 months before the end, Dr. Harris sat us down and said the treatments had stopped working. The scans showed the cancer was aggressive and spreading, and we were looking at weeks, maybe a couple of months. He said the words, "No further curative options," and focus on comfort care. I crumbled. I literally felt my knees buckle, and I had to sit down on the cold linoleum floor of the exam room, my back against the wall. Jack, in that way he had, pulled me up and held me and told me it was going to be okay, that I would be okay. He kept saying I had to promise him I'd find happiness again, that I'd use what little we had to build a new life. At that point, our financial situation was worse than grim. We had no savings left. It had all been eaten by medical costs and lost income. But Jack had a life insurance policy through Beacon Creative. He had kept it when he stopped working, thanks to Cobra, and we'd been paying the monthly premium, $57, out of our rapidly dwindling emergency fund. The policy was for $250,000, and I was listed as the sole beneficiary. Jack told me over and over in his hoarse, fading voice that this money was for me to pay off any medical debts, to put a down payment on a little house, or to go back to school if I wanted. He said, "I need to know you'll be okay, Claire. You've given up everything for me, your job, your health, your future. This is the one thing I can leave you. Please take it and make something beautiful." I cried and told him I didn't want money, I wanted him to stay. He smiled that sad, heartbreaking smile and said, "I know, but take it anyway. Promise me you'll use it to start over. Promise me." I promised. But as Jack got weaker and weaker, the pain meds got stronger. He was on a fentanyl patch, 75 micrograms per hour, changed every 3 days, and liquid morphine for breakthrough pain, 20 milligrams every 2 hours as needed. By the last month, he was in and out of lucidity. Some days he knew exactly where he was and who I was, and other days he would confuse me for a nurse he had in high school or call me Mom, and ask if his childhood pet rabbit, Thumper, had been fed. He'd talk to people who weren't there, carrying on one-sided conversations with a dead uncle or an imaginary version of his younger self. The hospice nurse, a wonderful, steady woman named Nadine, came 3 times a week. She was in her 50s, with a calm voice and gentle hands, and she kept a meticulous log of Jack's mental state at every visit. She noted his level of orientation, whether he could correctly state the date or the president's name, and most days he couldn't. She documented his medication doses and his cognitive slippage with clinical precision. I spent those final weeks in a daze myself, barely sleeping, barely eating, just trying to keep him comfortable and tell him I loved him every hour on the hour. I'd sit by his bed, holding his hand, playing his favorite Beatles albums softly, and I'd tell him stories about our life together, every happy memory, trying to fill the room with light. Rick started visiting even more frequently in that last stretch, and one afternoon, specifically a Wednesday I will never forget, the 14th of April, he asked if he could have some private brother time with Jack while I went to pick up a new prescription at the pharmacy. I was hesitant because Jack had been mostly unconscious that morning, but when Rick arrived, Jack actually stirred and rasped, "Rick, I need to talk to you about something." Rick looked at me with this gentle, almost tender expression and said, "Just brother stuff, you know. Why don't you go get that medicine and I'll sit with him, catch up. You deserve a break." I was so profoundly exhausted, so wrung out, that the idea of leaving the house for 45 minutes felt like a vacation at a resort. So I went. I kissed Jack's forehead, told him I'd be right back, and drove to the CVS on Tolmage Avenue. I was gone for exactly 47 minutes. It took me 11 days after Jack's death to find out what happened in that room. Jack passed away at home, in our bed, with me curled up next to him on a Friday at 3:12 in the morning. It was peaceful as these things can be. His breathing just slowed, and then stopped like a clock winding down. I held his hand for an hour after, just staring at his face, willing him to take another breath, my tears dripping onto his cheek. Eventually, I called hospice, and they sent a kind woman named Brenda to officially declare the time of death. I floated through the next few days in a heavy, gray fog. Rick stepped up and took charge of the funeral arrangements. He called Schermesser Funeral Home on East Market Street, set up a viewing and a service, and said he'd handle the upfront costs, about $8,700, and I could pay him back when the insurance money came through. He was so helpful, so present, that I actually felt a wave of love for him, this man who had stepped into the void. I hugged him in the funeral home parking lot, crying so hard I couldn't speak, and he put his arm around me and said, "We're family, Claire. Jack would want us to take care of each other. You don't have to worry." The funeral was small, maybe 30 people, mostly Jack's co-workers from Beacon Creative and a few of my old colleagues from the dental office. Jack's parents sat in the front row, dry-eyed because their particular brand of religion taught them that death was just a transition to a better place, so there was nothing to mourn. His mom even said to me at the reception, "He's in a better place now, dear. No need for tears. The Lord has a plan." I wanted to scream until my throat tore. My own mother came and spent the entire reception cornering strangers to talk about Emily's engagement, showing photos of the wedding venue on her phone, practically glowing. My father stayed home because he said funerals were too depressing. Emily didn't come. She had a critical regional sales meeting in Chicago that she absolutely couldn't miss. She sent a large, ostentatious flower arrangement with a card that said, "Thinking of you during this difficult time." I stood by the casket and felt like I was the only person on earth who actually knew who Jack Donovan was. The only person who remembered his laugh, his terrible puns, the way he'd dance in the kitchen while making pancakes. I felt a profound, existential loneliness that I can still feel in my chest if I think about it too long. A week after the funeral, I sat at our tiny kitchen table, the cat weaving between my legs, and I called the life insurance company. My voice was hoarse, and I was running on maybe 2 hours of sleep, but I needed to get that money to pay the funeral home, the hospice bills, the credit card debt we'd racked up for medications, and the mountain of other final notices that were already piling up in a sad little stack on the counter. There was an ambulance bill for $1,200, a hospital bill for $4,300, the invoice from the funeral home. The insurance company's representative had a very pleasant, practiced voice. Her name was Megan. She asked for Jack's policy number, verified his date of death, and then said the words that would change everything. "I'm so sorry for your loss, ma'am. Our records show the beneficiary on this policy is Richard Donovan. I can initiate the claim for him if he hasn't already submitted it." I remember my brain just refused to process the information. I said, "No, that's a mistake. I'm his wife. Claire Donovan. I'm the beneficiary. It's always been me." She repeated politely that a beneficiary change had been executed 6 weeks ago, signed and properly witnessed, and the new sole beneficiary was Richard Donovan, relationship, brother. She offered to email me a copy of the change form and the supporting video statement they required for such changes on a terminal patient's policy. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I gave her my email, and a moment later my inbox pinged. I opened the attachment. It was a standard change of beneficiary form, dated April 12th, smack in the middle of the heavy medication days. I saw Jack's signature at the bottom, but it was shaky and wrong. Just a jagged capital J that slanted downward and a looping scrawl that barely resembled his name. Next to it was the signature of a witness, a name I didn't recognize, Kevin Marsh. I would later learn he was a mechanic who worked directly for Rick, a young, loyal guy who'd do just about anything his boss asked. The email also contained a link to a secure video file. I clicked it with trembling fingers. The video was shot in our home, in our bedroom. Jack was propped up against pillows, his eyes glassy and unfocused, the fentanyl patch visible on his neck, his skin pale and waxy. He spoke slowly, mechanically, clearly reading from something off camera, his voice a flat monotone. He said, "I, Jack Donovan, want to change my life insurance beneficiary to my brother, Rick Donovan. I trust Rick to use the money to take care of family and honor my memory. Claire will be fine. She's young. She'll remarry. I don't want the money wasted on a new guy she meets down the road." My stomach dropped so hard and fast I thought I was going to vomit on the table. The words were like a stranger's, but it was his voice, that hoarse, medicated voice I'd heard 1,000 times. I played it 3 times, each time hoping it would change, each time feeling like a cold knife was twisting in my chest. Even knowing logically that Jack was not in his right mind, hearing those words from his lips felt like being erased, like our entire marriage had been reduced to a footnote in someone else's story. I sat at that table for a long time, the cat meowing for his dinner, and just stared at the screen until the battery on my laptop died. Then I called Rick. He answered on the second ring, sounding almost chipper, like he'd just had a great workout. "Hey, sis, how you holding up? You need anything?" I cut him off, my voice cracking. "Rick, I just got off the phone with the insurance company. They told me you're the beneficiary. What is this?" There was a pause, a soft, theatrical sigh. "Look, Claire, I didn't want you to find out like this. Jack and I had a long talk that day. He was really worried about you, about your future. He knew you were emotional and not thinking clearly, and he was terrified you'd jump into some rebound and a guy would sweet-talk you out of everything. I told him he was being paranoid, but you know how he got on those meds, fixated on things. He insisted. He basically begged me to be the beneficiary and look out for you. I didn't want to do it, but it was his dying wish, Claire. How could I say no to my own brother on his deathbed?" I felt my whole body go ice cold. I said, "That's a lie. Jack told me 100 times that money was for me. We talked about it just a few weeks ago before he got really bad. He said he wanted me to be secure, to have a fresh start. He made me promise." Rick's voice got a little sharper, a little less patient. "People say things under stress. Maybe he was just telling you what you wanted to hear to keep the peace. But when it came down to it, he made his real wishes clear. I'm sorry, but it's done. The money's already been processed, actually. Paid out to my account last Friday. 250 grand, minus some taxes, so about 237. I already used some of it to cover the funeral, so consider that my gift to you and Jack. You're welcome, by the way." I heard a clicking sound in the background, like he was opening a can of soda. The casualness, the "you're welcome," it made something inside me snap like a dry twig. I said, "You need to send me the rest of that money. That's my money, Rick. That money was for me, you know that." "I really don't think that's what Jack wanted," he said, and his voice was cold now, all pretense dropped. "But hey, you're still family. I'll help you if you really need it. I can maybe send you a couple grand to get on your feet, help you with a security deposit or something. But the full amount? No, Jack wanted it this way. It was his last request. You should respect his memory." And then he hung up. I tried calling back 3 times. Each time it went straight to voicemail. That was the injustice, clean and brutal. Cold, calculated, executed while my husband was too drugged to know his own name. And I, the one who had washed his body, held him while he cried, sacrificed my career and my health and my sanity for 18 months, was left with nothing but a video of my own husband saying I'd waste the money on a new man. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was a dagger twisted into the heart of the love I thought we had. Even though I knew deep in my soul that Jack was manipulated, the words still cut like nothing I'd ever felt. I felt utterly, completely alone in a way that made my chest feel like an empty cave. The next 2 months were the rock bottom, and I need you to understand just how bad it got, because it's the reason I didn't just walk away with a settlement later and call it a day. I had no money. Zero. Our joint bank account had $73 and change in it. The insurance money was gone to Rick. The savings were gone to medical costs. The car was sold. I had no job because I'd been out of the workforce for over a year, and Smile Solutions had filled my position with a full-timer named Tina who was under contract. I reached out to Dr. Patel again, practically begging, and she was genuinely sad for me, but there was nothing she could do. She offered to write me a glowing reference letter, which was kind, but references don't pay rent. So I started looking. I applied for every dental assistant opening within 20 miles, sent out over 30 resumes, and got exactly 2 callbacks. Both interviews followed the same script. I'd sit across from a young office manager with perfect makeup who'd glance at my resume, see the 15-month employment gap, and ask with a polite, skeptical frown, "So, you've been out of the field for a while. Can you tell me about that?" I'd explain about my husband's cancer and my caregiving, and they'd nod with practiced sympathy, but I could see them mentally moving my resume to the discard pile. I had no recent professional references except a thank you note from the widow of a patient I'd helped years before, which I actually, pathetically, brought to one interview, a crumpled card in my purse. The interviewer gave me a sad smile that said everything. They never called back. I couldn't afford the house. The rent was $900 a month, due on the 1st. My landlord, Mr. Henderson, was a decent guy, but he ran a business. He gave me a 30-day notice to either pay the back rent or vacate. I begged him, standing on his front porch with my hands clasped, for just a little more time, but he said he had a waiting list of prospective tenants and couldn't set a precedent. I understood, but it still felt like the walls were closing in. I started selling everything I could. I posted our 42-inch Samsung TV on Facebook Marketplace and got $140. I sold our couch, our kitchen table, our dresser, every piece of furniture until the living room was an empty echo chamber. I sold my engagement ring, a 1/4-carat diamond on a white gold band that Jack had saved for 6 months to buy, a ring he'd presented to me on one knee with tears in his eyes at a park. I took it to Cashland on Arlington, a grimy pawn shop with bars on the windows, and the young guy behind the counter, a man with a neck tattoo and dead eyes, barely looked at me as he handed over $420 in crumpled bills. I kept my wedding band because I couldn't bring myself to part with it. It felt like the last physical piece of Jack I had. I sold my replacement car, a 2012 Honda Civic with 160,000 miles that I'd bought with the 3,200 from the first car. I listed it for $3,000, and a college kid named Josh bought it for $2,800, cash. That money let me pay off the most pressing bills and cover a deposit on a room in a shared house on the west side of Akron, on Grace Avenue, in a neighborhood where I could hear sirens at least 3 times a night and where the corner store had bulletproof glass. I moved into that room with a backpack, a small duffel bag, and Piston in his carrier. The room was 9 feet by 10, with a stained mattress on the floor, a single bare bulb dangling from the ceiling on a frayed cord, and a window that looked out a brick wall 5 feet away. The carpet was an industrial gray that had absorbed decades of neglect, and there was a permanent smell of stale cigarettes and dampness that clung to everything I owned. The shared bathroom was down the hall, with black mold blooming in the grout and a shower that dripped constantly and only ever got lukewarm. The other tenants were a rotating cast of strangers who never made eye contact. A guy who worked nights at a warehouse and slept all day, his door always shut. A woman who screamed into her phone at 2 in the morning about a custody battle, and a college student who played first-person shooter games with the volume cranked. I slept with my wallet under my pillow, my phone clutched in my hand, terrified every single night. I found a job at a discount grocery store called Save-A-Lot on Copley Road, working as a cashier for $10.50 an hour. My shift started at 5 in the morning, which meant I had to wake up at 3:45 to walk there, 1.5 miles in the dark, through streets where half the streetlights were out. I walked because I had no car anymore, my feet blistering in cheap sneakers I'd bought at Walmart for $14 that had no arch support. Every day I stood for 8 hours on a concrete floor, scanning dented cans and day-old bread and expired snacks, with a single 15-minute break and a 30-minute unpaid lunch. The fluorescent lights gave me throbbing headaches, and my back would scream from standing in one spot, my knees aching. I'd come home to that room, to the stained mattress and the bare walls and the drip of the bathroom, and just sit and stare into the middle distance. Piston was my only comfort. He'd curl up on my chest and purr that motorboat purr, and that sound was the single thread keeping me tethered to the earth. But even caring for him was a struggle because I could barely afford cat food. I started buying the cheapest store brand, some generic mix that was mostly corn and ash, and Piston would eat it, but I watched his coat get dull and matted, and he started shedding in clumps. I felt a fresh wave of guilt every time I filled his bowl. One night, after a particularly brutal shift, where a customer screamed at me for 20 minutes because her coupon for 50 cents off canned soup was a day expired, I came back and found a letter from the landlord of the shared house tacked to my door with a pushpin. It said my rent was being raised from $450 to $500 a month, effective next cycle, because utility costs have increased. I had nothing to spare. I had about $30 in my checking account until payday, which was still a week away. I sat on that mattress and sobbed until I couldn't breathe, my body shaking, my throat raw. I started skipping meals intentionally. Breakfast was usually a single packet of instant oatmeal I'd taken from the food pantry at our local church, mixed with tap water because milk was a luxury. Lunch was sometimes a peanut butter sandwich, one slice of bread folded over, if I could afford the bread. Dinners were often just a banana and a glass of water, or nothing at all. I lost 15 pounds in 6 weeks, my clothes hanging off me like sacks, my hip bones jutting out. My hair started falling out in clumps from stress and malnutrition. I'd see it in the shower drain, big dark wads, and I'd just stare at them with a numb detachment. I looked in the smudged mirror one morning and saw a hollowed-out ghost of myself, dark purple circles under my eyes so deep they looked like bruises, cheekbones sharp as blades, a vacant 1,000-yard stare. I was 31 years old and looked 50, and all the while I could see Rick's life on social media. I know I shouldn't have looked. It was digital self-harm, but I was obsessed, like picking at a scab. I'd walk to the public library on my day off, use their free Wi-Fi, and scroll through Facebook. Rick and his wife, Sarah, had taken a vacation to Clearwater Beach, Florida, the week after the insurance payout cleared. They posted photos of their feet in the white sand, pink drinks with little umbrellas, #blessed. Sarah posted a picture of a brand new Rolex, a Datejust with a diamond bezel, captioning it, "My hubby spoils me. #grateful hard work pays off." Rick bought a brand new Ford F-250 King Ranch, a $70,000 truck, black with tan leather interior, and made a post about how American muscle and hard work pay off. Dreams come true. He posed leaning against the grill, arms crossed, sunglasses on, looking like he'd just conquered the world. Sarah got the Rolex and a new Louis Vuitton handbag. They redid their entire kitchen, posting before and after photos of gleaming granite countertops and new stainless steel appliances. He even posted a video of his shop with a caption about expanding to a second location, a Donovan Automotive Group, coming soon, with a glossy architectural rendering of a bigger building. The comment sections were full of people congratulating him, telling him he was an inspiration, a self-made man, that he deserved it all. That money, Jack's money, the money Jack had set aside to give me a fresh start, was funding his brother's midlife ego trip while I was literally starving in a moldy room. The injustice was so thick I could taste it, a metallic, bitter taste in the back of my throat. And my family, because of course, was no help at all. I called my mom one night from the payphone outside the gas station on Copley, the same payphone I'd use later, and I laid it all out. My voice was shaking and I was fighting back tears. I said, "Mom, I'm in real trouble. Rick stole the insurance money and I'm about to be homeless. I have $17 to my name. Can you please loan me $500, just to make rent this 1 month? I will pay it back, I swear." I heard her exhale a long put-upon sound. She said, "Have you asked Rick? He's got plenty. Jack clearly left it to him for a reason, Claire. Maybe you should use this as a learning experience. You always were a little careless with money. Remember that credit card debt you had in college? I had a $300 credit card bill once years ago because my car's alternator died and I needed the repair to get to class. That was my great financial irresponsibility. I said, "Mom, this isn't the same. He tricked Jack. He took everything." She said, "Well, that's between you and Rick. I'm not getting in the middle of family drama. Your father and I are on a fixed income, you know. Fixed income. My dad's Jeep pension was $4,200 a month, and they owned their house free and clear. I hung up the phone and just stood there, the plastic receiver in my hand, the night air cold on my face. My sister Emily, when I finally reached her through a string of texts, sent me a link to a GoFundMe page she'd set up, not for me, but for her friend's Dachshund's hip surgery. I texted her, "Emily, I'm about to be homeless. Can you help at all?" She wrote back, "You've always been so dramatic. You should have saved more when you had a job. That's what Mark and I do. We have a strict budget and a 6-month emergency fund. It's called being an adult." Mark, the surgeon fiancé, who just bought a 5-bedroom house in Sylvania with a pool. I realized then, with a cold finality, that I was truly alone. No husband, no family, no money, no safety net. That was my rock bottom. It got worse before it got better, because this story needs you to feel the absolute floor. One Sunday in early November, the Ohio weather had turned bitter and rainy, and the radiator in my room barely functioned, giving off only a faint, distant warmth that died a foot from the wall. I got an eviction notice from the shared house landlord, a typed, misspelled letter taped to my door saying I owed 2 weeks of past due rent, $250, and he was terminating my tenancy effective immediately. He gave me 48 hours to vacate. I found him in the hallway, a short, sweaty man named Gary who smelled like stale cigarettes and cheap cologne, and I pleaded with him, my voice cracking. He just shrugged and said, "Not my problem, sweetheart. Pay up or hit the bricks." I had exactly $17 in my bank account and nowhere to go. I packed up Piston and what little I owned, my duffel bag and my backpack, and for 3 nights I crashed in a friend's basement. That friend was a woman named Jenna, a former co-worker from the dental office who felt sorry for me. She let me sleep on a futon in her unfinished basement, but her boyfriend, a guy named Derek who wore gaming headsets and never made eye contact, was uncomfortable with my presence. He said I was bringing down the energy and that my cat might scratch his gaming chair. After 3 days, Jenna texted me apologetically, near tears, and said Derek was insisting I leave. She gave me a $20 bill from her wallet and a bag of cat food, and she hugged me, but she made me go. I ended up sleeping in a church parking lot one night. I found a corner behind a dumpster at St. Matthew's Lutheran Church on East Avenue, huddled in a sleeping bag I'd salvaged from next to the Goodwill dumpster behind the Save-A-Lot. It smelled like mildew and old potatoes, but it was thick. It was mid-November, about 40 degrees, drizzling, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and doesn't leave. I curled up against the brick wall, the dumpster blocking some of the wind, Piston in his carrier next to me with a towel draped over it to keep him warm. I kept whispering to him that it would be okay, even though I was pretty sure I was going to die of exposure or just give up entirely. At about 3 in the morning, a woman found me. She was older, bundled in a thick navy coat, walking a small fluffy dog on a leash. Her name was Martha. She saw me there, a heap against the wall, and instead of calling the police or backing away, she came closer, peering at me with kind, concerned eyes and asked, "Sweetheart, are you okay? What on earth are you doing out here?" And I, for reasons I still don't fully understand, broke open and told her the entire story, every ugly, sordid detail. The cancer, the insurance, the betrayal, the family that abandoned me, the eviction, the hunger. Martha listened. She sat down on a cold metal bench nearby, her little dog on her lap, and she listened for over an hour without interrupting, just nodding and saying, "Oh, honey," in this soft, empathetic way. And when I was done, she said, "My nephew is a lawyer. Not the flashy kind on TV, but a real, honest attorney who takes cases when insurance companies or family members screw over regular people. I've seen him win for folks with nothing. He works out of a small office downtown, and he's good. I'm going to give you his number." She dug through her purse and couldn't find a card, so she pulled out a napkin from her coat pocket and wrote a name and number on it with a tiny pen. Gregory Hill, with a downtown phone number. It was so absurd, a napkin in a church parking lot at 3 in the morning, but I took it like it was the winning lottery numbers. I tucked it into my coat and thanked her until I was almost incoherent. I called the number the next morning from the payphone at the gas station, the same one I'd used to call my mom. I fed it 2 quarters I'd begged from a middle-aged man in a suit who looked at me like I was the scum of the earth, but eventually pulled the coins from his pocket and dropped them into my hand without a word. The lawyer's name, Gregory Hill, was on the napkin. I dialed, my fingers shaking from cold and nerves. A receptionist answered, and I said, "My name is Claire Donovan. Martha gave me this number. I have a situation." She put me on hold, and then a deep, calm voice came on the line. "This is Greg Hill. Martha is my aunt. She already called me this morning and told me to expect your call. Come to my office this afternoon. Let's talk. If I think you have a case, I'll take it on contingency. That means I don't get paid unless we win. Can you get here at 2? I showed up at his office on South Main Street at 2 p.m. sharp, still in my shabby, worn coat and cheap sneakers that were starting to come apart at the seams, my hair a tangled mess, dark circles ringing my eyes. Greg was a tall man in his late 40s, wire-rimmed glasses, a slightly rumpled suit that looked like it had been slept in, but his eyes were sharp and kind. He sat me down in a small conference room with a scarred wooden table and asked me to tell him everything, from the very beginning. I did. I had brought a folder, a beat-up manila folder I'd kept under my mattress, with copies of the insurance policy, the change form with the shaky signature, printouts of the email from Megan, a transcript of the video I'd typed up at the library, and the medical records from Dr. Harris that I'd personally requested and picked up from the hospital, which clearly documented Jack's cognitive decline on high-dose opioids. Greg spent 2 hours with me, taking meticulous notes on a yellow legal pad, asking detailed questions about the timeline, the witness Kevin Marsh, the hospice nurse Nadine, and exactly what Rick had said on the phone call. He was thorough and calm and methodical, and for the first time in months, a tiny, flickering candle of hope lit in my chest. At the end, he leaned back in his chair and said, "I think we have a very strong case for undue influence. The legal standard is that the influencer, Rick, had a confidential or trusting relationship with Jack, and used that relationship to overcome his free will at a time when Jack was particularly vulnerable. The fact that the witness was a subordinate of Rick's, the timing when Jack was on massive doses of fentanyl and morphine, the scripted video, and the medical records all point to a textbook case of coercion. I'm going to file a lawsuit in Summit County Common Pleas Court, demanding the return of the full death benefit plus your legal fees, and I'll push for punitive damages if we can get them. It won't be fast, but I believe we will win." I signed the retainer agreement right there on the spot, my hand trembling so much my signature was barely legible. He also reached into his desk drawer and handed me $200 in cash from a small client assistance fund his firm maintained for people in desperate situations. That money got me and Piston into a cheap motel for 2 weeks, the Roadway Inn on Waterloo Road, a place with thin walls and a TV that only got static on 3 channels, but it had a working heater and a door that locked. It felt like the Ritz. The case took 14 months. 14 months of discovery, depositions, motions, and waiting, while I had to keep surviving in the background. Greg connected me with a social worker named Denise, a no-nonsense woman with a warm smile who helped me apply for food stamps and Medicaid. I was approved for $194 a month in SNAP benefits, which felt like an unimaginable fortune. Denise also found me a spot in a women's shelter called Hope's Landing, a converted Victorian house on Brown Street that had a policy allowing emotional support pets. I cried, big ugly sobs of relief, when they told me Piston could stay. I lived in a small room on the 2nd floor with a twin bed, a dresser with 1 broken drawer, and a window that overlooked a small garden. The bathroom was shared, but it was clean, and there was a communal kitchen with a working stove. The shelter had rules: a 10 p.m. curfew, mandatory life skills classes on Tuesdays, and a support group on Thursdays. I went to every single one. The other women there were from all walks: a former high school teacher who'd lost everything in a nasty divorce, a young mother fleeing domestic violence, an older military veteran with PTSD and a gentle soul. We'd sit in a circle and share our stories, our fears, our tiny victories, and for the first time since Jack died, I didn't feel like a defective freak. I felt like a survivor among survivors. I got a slightly better job, not at Save-A-Lot, but as a receptionist at a tire shop called Tony's Tire and Auto on East Exchange Street for $12 an hour. The owner, Tony, was a burly, kind Italian guy in his late 50s with grease permanently under his fingernails and a big, booming laugh. He hired me on the spot because, as he put it, I had honest eyes and a steady voice for the phones. I sat at a worn wooden desk in a tiny office that smelled like coffee and rubber, answered calls, scheduled appointments, and did data entry. It was boring but stable, and it was warm, and Tony never once made me feel like I was a charity case. I saved every penny I could. My entire budget was food, transportation via the bus, and cat supplies. I reconnected with an old colleague from the dental office, a dental hygienist named Maria, who let me clean her house in Fairlawn every other weekend for $50 in cash. I'd scrub her bathrooms and mop her hardwood floors, and I was genuinely grateful for the work. I didn't socialize. I didn't date. I didn't do much of anything but survive, work, and prepare for the legal battle. I'd visit the library on my off days and read up on insurance law and undue influence cases, trying to understand every step Greg was taking. I wanted to be ready. Greg kept me updated through every twist and turn. The lawsuit was filed in Summit County Common Pleas Court, case number CV-2018-07-3456. Rick was served at his shop by a process server, a guy Greg hired who later told us Rick tore up the papers and threw them at him, yelling something about gold-digging drama queens. The discovery phase was brutal for me emotionally. Rick's lawyer, a slick guy named Dennis from a big firm in Cleveland, argued that Jack was of perfectly sound mind when he made the change, that he'd been motivated by a genuine, long-standing concern about my financial judgment, and that the video was clear evidence of his true wishes. They played that video during my deposition, on a large monitor, while I sat in a conference room and had to watch my dying husband, gaunt and glassy-eyed, say those words. They paused it and asked me to confirm it was Jack's voice. I said yes. Through tears I couldn't stop. They asked me if Jack had ever expressed concerns about my spending habits. I had to recount the time I'd bought a slightly more expensive brand of laundry detergent, and he'd teased me about it. But that was it. It was humiliating and devastating. But we had Nadine, the hospice nurse. Greg tracked her down through the hospice agency's employment records, and she agreed to testify without hesitation. She was still working, still the same calm, competent woman, and she brought her meticulous notes. Her notes from April 12th, the day the form was signed, were absolutely damning. She had written in her careful handwriting, "Patient extremely confused today. Called me mom repeatedly. Asked if his childhood rabbit Thumper was still alive and if it needed to be fed. Unable to state the correct year or the name of the current president. Oriented to self only. Morphine dose increased to 20 mg Q2H due to escalating pain levels. Declined to eat lunch, stating he wasn't hungry but then asked for a food that doesn't exist. Unclear if capable of making reasoned decisions." She testified in her deposition, calm and professional, that in her medical opinion, Jack Donovan did not have the cognitive capacity to understand or execute a complex financial instrument like a beneficiary change on that date. The oncologist, Dr. Harris, also provided extensive records and a sworn affidavit stating that the combination of fentanyl and morphine Jack was on would have caused significant cognitive impairment, including confusion, memory loss, and heightened suggestibility, making him highly vulnerable to influence. The handwriting analysis on the signature was technically inconclusive, but we didn't need it to be. The medical evidence was overwhelming. We also deposed Kevin Marsh, the witness. Under oath, he squirmed and admitted he worked for Rick as a mechanic, and that Rick had asked him to come to witness a private family document for my sick brother. He said he didn't read the form, didn't know what it was, and just signed where Rick pointed. He said Rick told him Jack wanted to fix some paperwork and that it was just a formality. The circumstantial evidence stacked up like bricks in a wall. The judge, Judge Morrison, a severe woman in her 60s with a no-nonsense reputation, didn't even let the case go to a full jury trial. At the summary judgment hearing, Greg argued there were no genuine disputes of material fact. Jack was terminally ill and heavily medicated. Rick orchestrated the beneficiary change using a loyal subordinate as a witness, and the video showed Jack reading from an obvious script in a monotone while heavily impaired. The judge agreed. She ruled that the beneficiary change was void ab initio, void from the very beginning, due to undue influence, and that the insurance proceeds rightfully belonged to Jack's estate, which meant they belonged to me as his surviving spouse. She ordered Rick to repay the full $250,000, plus an additional $50,000 to cover my legal fees and costs, which Greg had documented down to the penny, including the cost of the postage stamps he'd used to mail filings. That was a total judgment of $300,000. Rick was given 60 days to comply. He tried to appeal, arguing that the video proved Jack's true intent and that the medical records were open to interpretation, but the appellate court denied his motion in a terse, one-page order. I remember the exact moment Greg called me to say the appeal was denied. I was at the tire shop front desk, phone cradled between my ear and shoulder, and when he said the words, I had to put the caller on hold, walk into the tiny bathroom, lock the door, and sob with my hand over my mouth so no one would hear. Rick had to liquidate assets to come up with the money. I learned later, through mutual acquaintances and public records, that he took out a second mortgage on his house, a 5-bedroom colonial in green that he'd bought with part of the insurance money. That second mortgage was for $180,000 at a predatory interest rate. He drained his business operating account, sold a pontoon boat, and 2 jet skis at a massive loss. The forced sale of his toys nearly broke him, but he paid. I got the check delivered to Greg's office, and Greg took his agreed-upon contingency fee of 30%, plus some disbursements. After everything, I walked away with a little over $210,000 in a new bank account I opened at a local credit union. I stood at the ATM in the vestibule, looked at the balance on the screen, and for the first time in nearly 2 years, I felt like I could finally, actually breathe. Now, a lot of people in my situation would have taken that money and played it safe, bought a modest house, maybe gone back to school for something stable like dental hygiene, and just tried to erase the past. And for a while, I considered that. I thought about packing up and moving to a new city, maybe down to Columbus or out to Pittsburgh, starting completely fresh where nobody knew my name or my history. But during those months of working at Tony's Tire and Auto, something unexpected and transformative happened. Tony's was a good shop, 3 bays, honest work, and I started watching the mechanics. At first it was idle curiosity, just something to look at during slow afternoons when the phones were quiet. But then I became fascinated. The way they could listen to an engine and diagnose a bad pulley just by the sound. The way they'd methodically tear down a transmission, every gear and seal laid out in order. The satisfaction of a brake job done perfectly, the quiet hum of a freshly tuned engine. It reminded me of the puzzles I used to do with my grandfather as a kid, taking apart old radios and putting them back together, that same focused, meditative process. I started asking questions. Javier, the head mechanic, a guy from Puerto Rico with a thick accent and a gentle way of teaching, would show me things. He let me hold the flashlight while he worked on a timing belt, explaining each step in patient detail. Leon, another mechanic, a quiet giant of a man, showed me how to use an OBD-Roman 2 scanner and read diagnostic codes, what a P0420 meant, and how to trace it to a catalytic converter or an O2 sensor. On slow afternoons, I'd leave the front desk, with Tony's amused permission, and go out into the bays. I'd sit on a rolling stool, watching and learning, the smell of oil and metal becoming familiar and comforting. Tony noticed my interest and started letting me do small things after my shift if I swept the floors. I'd change oil, rotate tires, swap out air filters. I discovered I had a knack for it. I could hear a misfire and know it was cylinder 3. I could feel a warped rotor through the brake pedal. My hands, which had once handled delicate dental tools with precision, found a new home in the heft of a socket wrench. I realized I was good at it. Genuinely good. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a spark ignited. I thought about Rick's automotive across town, with its greasy bays, overpriced repairs, and the way Rick had always mocked Jack for not being a real man because he couldn't rebuild an engine. I thought about how Rick had built his little empire on the back of my husband's death, and I felt that fire of purpose light in my chest, the one I hadn't felt since before Jack got sick. So when that settlement money hit my account, I didn't think about dental school. I thought about cars. I enrolled at Stark State College in their automotive technology program, a 2-year associate degree track with full ASE certification preparation. I walked onto campus, a 30-year-old woman in a sea of mostly 18-year-old boys, and I signed up for classes, engine repair, brake systems, electrical and electronic systems, steering and suspension. I paid the full tuition up front, about $14,000 from my settlement money. The first day, I walked into the massive shop classroom, a hangar-like building that smelled of oil and metal and ambition, and every head turned. I was the only woman in the entire daytime program, aside from one other I heard about in the evening classes. The instructor, A gray-haired, barrel-chested man named Mr. Kowalski raised his eyebrows but said nothing. A couple of the younger guys made little jokes under their breath, comments about taking a class for girls or hoping she doesn't break a nail. I ignored them. I put on my safety glasses, pulled my hair back, and got to work. I knew I'd have to be twice as good to be taken half as seriously, so I stayed late every day. I practiced on the training engines until my hands were cracked and calloused. I read the textbooks cover to cover, memorizing torque specs and diagnostic trees. When we had our first hands-on exam, a brake pad replacement on a Chevy Malibu, I finished in 22 minutes with perfect torque specs and 0 comebacks. The second fastest guy took 35 minutes. The jokes stopped after that. I found a mentor in Mr. Kowalski, who saw my determination and started giving me advanced problems to solve after class. He'd disable a sensor on a training car and say, "Diagnose it, Donovan. Clock's ticking." I'd spend an hour tracing wires and testing voltages until I found the fault, and he'd grunt approvingly. I graduated at the top of my cohort with a 3.9 GPA, and I earned my ASE certifications in 8 areas, including engine repair, brakes, electrical, and heating and air conditioning. During school, I kept working part-time at Tony's shop, building my hours and my resume. Tony was proud of me. He said I had a natural touch and a mechanic's ear, and he offered me a full-time position when I graduated. But I had bigger plans. I saved my money like a miser, lived in a tiny studio apartment on Copley Road for $550 a month, drove a beat-up Subaru Outback I bought for $1,500 that burned oil like crazy. But I could fix it myself. By the time I finished school, I had about $170,000 left of the settlement. I started looking for a location to open my own garage. I drove all over Akron, looking at empty storefronts and old gas stations, but nothing felt right. Then one afternoon, driving down South Arlington Street, I saw it. A former muffler shop, a small building with 2 service bays and a tired, faded sign, sitting directly across the street from Rick's Automotive. It had been empty for 6 months, weeds poking through the cracked asphalt lot. I pulled over, parked, and just stared. I could see Rick's building 100 yards away, his mechanics moving around, his trucks in the lot. And I knew with a certainty that settled into my bones that this was exactly where I needed to be, not out of burning spite, but out of a profound sense of poetic justice. I wanted to build something clean and honest right in the shadow of his deceit. I called the number on the faded for lease sign. The landlord was a retired minister named Mr. Patterson, a kind old black man with a warm, rolling laugh and a gentle presence. We met at the property on a sunny Tuesday, and he walked me through the dusty bays. He told me the rent was $3,000 a month, which was higher than I wanted, but the location was everything. He was hesitant at first because I was new to the business and a solo woman, but I showed him my detailed business plan, my ASE certifications in a binder, and a glowing letter of reference from Tony, and his expression shifted. He agreed to a 1-year lease with an option to renew, and we shook hands on it. I signed the lease that very afternoon. I named the shop Claire's Auto Care. I wanted my name on the sign, out front, so everyone who drove past knew exactly who was behind it. I poured $40,000 into renovations. I bought 2 brand new hydraulic lifts, a state-of-the-art Hunter alignment machine, a full set of Snap-on tools, and I built a clean, bright waiting area with free coffee, a charging station, and a big window where customers could watch their cars being worked on. I painted the walls a soft, calming blue, had the floors epoxied in light gray so they gleamed, and installed good, honest lighting. I hired 2 mechanics I'd met at Stark State, Javier, who had left Tony's to join me, and another guy named Leon, a quiet, fastidious worker. They were both incredibly skilled and tired of working for bosses who cheated them on flat-rate hours. I paid them $28 an hour plus full benefits, which was a solid $5 more than Rick paid his crew, and I made sure they knew they were the backbone of the operation. I opened on a Monday in May, with a big banner out front that read, "We treat your car like family, not a transaction," and a grand opening special of $19.99 oil changes. Javier, Leon, and I stood in the empty lot that morning with our coffee, and we waited. At 8:34, a guy in a Ford F-150 pulled in, his brakes squealing. We checked them, found a seized caliper pin, fixed it in under an hour, and charged him $85. He left a 5-star Google review that afternoon. I was in business. The first few months were slow, painfully, gut-checking slow. Some days we'd have 2 cars, and the rest of the time we'd clean the tools, organize the inventory, and watch the traffic flow by. Rick's place across the street had been there for 15 years, and it had a deeply loyal, almost tribal customer base. People in the neighborhood knew the Donovan name, even if they didn't know the new owner's story. But I kept my prices about 10% lower than his by being ruthlessly efficient and never padding labor hours. If the book said a job took 3 hours and we could do it in 2 by working smarter, we'd charge for 2. I'd post before and after photos on a Facebook page I ran myself, with detailed, plain English explanations of what we did and why. I'd respond to every single review, good or bad, personally. Word started to spread like ripples in a pond. A woman named Sheila came in with a check engine light that Rick's shop had quoted her $1,200 to fix, claiming she needed a whole new catalytic converter. I plugged in my scanner, saw a code for an evaporative emissions leak, and found the real problem: a loose gas cap and a faulty O2 sensor. I fixed it for $180, showed her the old parts, and she burst into tears. She hugged me right there in the lobby, saying she'd been saving for months for that fake repair. She became my most vocal evangelist, posting in every local moms group and Nextdoor thread she could find. Within 6 months, I was breaking even. Within a year, I was turning a solid, steady profit, and I'd hired 2 more techs, bringing my team to 4. I bought a used tow truck, a white flatbed with my logo on the side, and started a roadside assistance program. I'd personally go out on calls on weekends, changing tires and jumping batteries, building trust one grateful person at a time. Meanwhile, I could see the effect happening across the street like a slow-motion collapse. I'd notice Rick's lot, which used to be packed all day, starting to have empty bays. His mechanics, guys I recognized from the industry, would stand around outside, smoking cigarettes, looking idle and anxious. His trucks would sit. My customers started telling me horror stories, how Rick's shop had quoted them for an unnecessary transmission flush, how they'd been overcharged for a simple brake job, how the staff was rude and dismissive. I never once gloated. I just kept doing my job, kept treating people fairly. The mid-story hook came on a Thursday afternoon in October, about 2.5 years after I opened. The air was crisp and the leaves were turning, and my shop was humming. I had 5 cars in the bays and 2 more waiting in the lot. I was in my small office, a room barely big enough for a desk and a filing cabinet, reviewing an inventory order for brake pads and rotors. The little bell on the front door jingled, and I looked up to see Rick Donovan. I hadn't seen him up close since the courtroom, where he'd glared at me with an almost feral hatred as the judge read her ruling. He had changed. He looked older, thinner, his face deeply lined and covered in a salt and pepper stubble. His coveralls were stained with grease and ripped at the knee, and his shoulders had a weary, defeated slump. His eyes, which had once been arrogant and sharp, were tired and bloodshot. He asked if we could talk privately. I nodded, my heart picking up pace, and led him into my office, closing the door behind us. He didn't sit. He paced the tiny space, 2 steps one way, 2 steps back, like an animal in a cage. He said his business was dying. He'd lost 3 of his best mechanics to me over the last 2 years, including his head mechanic, Dave, who had quit just the week before. His customer count was down by over 60%. His latest quarterly profit and loss statement showed a loss of $18,000. His business line of credit was maxed, and the bank, Fifth Third, was threatening to call the loan on his building if he missed another payment. His wife, Sarah, had left him 2 months ago, taking the kids and moving into a cramped apartment in Fairlawn, filing for divorce. He was 1 missed payroll away from total collapse. He stopped pacing and faced me, his hands clasped in front of him like a supplicant in an old painting. He said, "Claire, I know we have history, bad, complicated history. I messed up. I know that now, but I'm asking you as Jack's brother, as your family. Can we work something out? Maybe you buy me out, merge the shops. You've got all the momentum, or just lend me $50,000 to get through the next few months, keep the bank off my back. I'll pay you back with interest. I swear on Jack's memory. He would want us to help each other. We're the only ones left who really knew him." His voice actually cracked at the end, a ragged, desperate sound, and for half a second a tiny, traitorous flicker of pity ignited in my chest. Then I remembered the church parking lot, the eviction notice, the generic cat food I could barely afford, the video of my husband, his voice a slurred monotone, saying I'd run off with a new man, and I let the pity die. I stood up from my desk slowly, and I looked him directly in the eye. My voice was calm, quieter than I expected, but steady as a held level. "Rick, you came into my home when my husband was dying and you preyed on him. You sat in my living room, ate my food, and planned how to steal the one thing he wanted to leave me. You took $250,000, and you used it for beach vacations and a Rolex and a $70,000 truck while I was sleeping behind a dumpster with my cat. You never once called to ask if I was okay. You never offered me a single dollar when I was evicted and starving. Not even the $800 you owed Jack. Not even a sandwich." I paused, and he opened his mouth to interrupt, but I held up my hand. "Now you come in here, not to apologize in any real way, not to make amends, but because you need something from me. You need my money. You need me to rescue you. But I didn't steal your customers. I didn't sabotage your reputation. I just opened a better shop and treated people with honesty and respect. I pay my employees a fair wage. I don't upsell. I don't lie to little old ladies about their catalytic converters. If your business is failing, it's not because of me. It's because you ran a dishonest shop that relied on overcharging and coasting on a name you didn't earn. The consequences you're facing are yours. They are the natural result of years of cutting corners and treating people like marks. I am not going to lend you a single cent. I'm not going to buy you out. I'm not going to be your safety net. The only thing I'll offer you is this advice. Sell off what you have left, settle your debts, and find a new line of work. You're not cut out for this anymore." He stared at me, his face cycling through shock, then fury, turning a deep, mottled red. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. He called me a cold, vindictive woman, said I'd always been jealous of his success, that I'd planned this entire thing from the moment Jack died, that I was a monster trying to destroy the Donovan name. I said, "I'm not destroying anything. You did that all by yourself. Now please leave my shop, Rick." He slammed my office door so hard the glass pane in the front door rattled. I heard him stomp out, his boots heavy on the concrete. I sat back down, my heart pounding a drumbeat in my ears, but my hands were perfectly steady. I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of that interaction, the finality of my refusal, was a release. That was the confrontation. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten him. I didn't scheme or gloat. I just let the consequences of his own choices land squarely on his shoulders. And honestly, that was enough. Because over the next 6 months, the walls closed in on Rick Donovan all on their own. I didn't have to lift a finger. The natural momentum of failure did all the work. His mechanic Dave, who had quit, came to work for me because he'd heard through Javier that I paid fairly and didn't scream at my employees. He told me stories about Rick's temper, how he'd throw tools across the shop and call people worthless if a job took too long. His receptionist, a woman named Patty, left because he couldn't make payroll on time twice in a row. She showed up at my shop one day with a resume, but I didn't have an opening then. His Yelp and Google review pages, which had always had a handful of complaints, suddenly exploded with 1-star reviews from longtime customers who finally felt free to speak up. A guy named Mike wrote that Rick charged him $950 for a water pump that should have been $600, and when he questioned the bill, Rick yelled at him in front of other customers. A woman named Esther said they fixed her air conditioning and it broke again 2 days later, and Rick refused to honor the warranty, telling her she must have done something wrong. These reviews weren't from me. I never wrote a single one, I swear it. These were real people finally sharing their experiences. The final nail came when a local TV station, Whacker, ran an investigative segment on auto repair fraud in the Akron area. They used Rick's Automotive as their primary example because a former employee, a guy I didn't even know, had leaked cell phone footage to the reporter. The footage showed Rick telling a mechanic, clear as day, "Just tell her it needs a whole new rack and pinion. She doesn't know anything about cars. That's an easy $2,000. The actual problem was a worn tie rod, a $200 fix. The segment aired on a Tuesday night, and I watched it on my couch, piston on my lap, a quiet sense of vindication settling over me. By the end of that year, Rick's Automotive had closed its doors for good. The bank foreclosed on the building. The sign came down. He lost his house because he couldn't keep up with that predatory second mortgage. His truck, the giant Ford F-250 King Ranch, got repossessed in the middle of the night, hauled away on a flatbed. I know this because his ex-wife Sarah actually sent me a long, rambling Facebook message. She didn't apologize exactly, but she said she'd left him because of the stress and the constant lies, and she was now living in Indiana with the kids, trying to start over. She said, "I should have seen what he did to you back then. I'm sorry I was blind." I didn't reply. Rick filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy in the Northern District of Ohio. The last I heard, through the grapevine, he was living in his parents' basement in Cuyahoga Falls, working as a lube tech at a quick-change oil place on State Road, making $16 an hour. He was 41 years old with no savings, no house, no family, no business. He had lost everything, and I had not done a single illegal, unethical, or even unkind thing to make it happen. I just existed, and I refused to rescue him. As for me, I'm still right here on South Arlington. I expanded into a third bay last spring, knocking down a wall into an adjacent space that Mr. Patterson gave me a good deal on. I now have 9 employees, all earning a solid living wage, full health insurance, a matched 401k, and paid uniforms and tool allowances. We're a family. I paid off my student loans and bought a sweet little Cape Cod house in Ellet, a pale yellow house with white shutters, a big fenced yard for my dog, a goofy golden retriever mix named Sunny I adopted from the Humane Society, and a sunny window seat for Piston, who is now 10 years old, sleek and shiny on his expensive grain-free food, and very clearly the true boss of the house. I met someone. A kind, gentle man named Daniel who teaches 8th grade science at Kenmore Middle School. He's patient and funny and understands that a part of my heart will always belong to Jack. We take things very slow, go on quiet hikes, and cook dinner together. I don't need a big ring or a flashy wedding. I just need peace. And I have that peace. Every morning I drive to my shop in my clean, reliable Honda CR-V, and I see the empty, boarded-up building across the street, the faded Rick's Automotive, sign still hanging crookedly, the lot cracked and overgrown with weeds. I don't gloat. I just remind myself that I built something honest and good out of the ashes of a betrayal that nearly killed me. The revenge wasn't a master plan I cooked up in a dark room. It was just the natural, inevitable result of a woman who refused to stay on the ground. I let him lose everything by simply refusing to be his lifeline, and I'd do it exactly the same way again. Edit. So many of you are asking about the cat. Yes, Piston is healthy and currently asleep on my keyboard as I type this, which makes answering emails a challenge. He's spoiled completely rotten. He gets the expensive grain-free salmon and sweet potato kibble, a can of wet food every morning precisely at 7, and Daniel built him a custom Casio in the backyard so he can safely watch the birds and judge them. He's been with me through the worst of everything, and I sometimes think he's the only creature who never doubted me for a second. Edit 2. Several folks have asked about my sister, Emily. We haven't spoken in 3 years. She reached out last year after my shop was featured in a local business spotlight in the Akron Beacon Journal. She sent a long Instagram message saying she was so incredibly proud of her big sister and wanted to get lunch and reconnect and heal. It felt like a script from a PR rep. I replied with a brief, polite text saying I appreciated the sentiment, but I wasn't interested in reconnecting. My mother called me within an hour, absolutely furious, saying I was being cruel and unforgiving and that Emily was just trying to mend fences. I told her Emily had over 2 decades of chances to treat me like family, and the well was dry. I don't owe anyone a relationship when the foundation was built on indifference and condescension. She hasn't called since. I hear through the grapevine that Emily's marriage to Dr. Mark is on shaky ground, and she's been asking about me. I genuinely don't wish her any ill, but I am not her emotional safety net or her backup plan. Edit 3. For those wondering about the legality and ethics of everything, yes, I ran every competitive decision past Greg, my lawyer, to make sure I was in the clear. I never once poached a customer with deception or false advertising. I simply offered a better service at a fair price. Rick's employees approached me on their own, because word travels fast in the mechanic community about which shops treat their people well. I never posted a single fake review or slandered him online. The customer reviews were organic, and the news story came from a disgruntled ex-worker of his who had a legitimate grievance over unpaid overtime. My hands are completely clean. The only thing I did was refuse to bail him out when he came begging. Edit 4. Some commenters are telling me I should have helped my brother-in-law, that holding grudges is unhealthy, and that true family forgives and moves forward. I respect that perspective, but I deeply and fundamentally disagree. He didn't just slight me at a dinner party. He orchestrated the financial and emotional destruction of my life while I was at my most vulnerable. He watched me suffer, starve, and nearly freeze to death without a flicker of remorse. I didn't owe him a lifeline just because we share a dead husband's DNA. Forgiveness is a personal, internal act, and mine doesn't include writing a $50,000 check to a man who laughed while I lost everything. If that makes me petty, I am completely, peacefully okay with being petty. Edit 5. A few people have asked if I still have the video of Jack. I don't. I deleted it permanently from every device and cloud backup the day the case concluded. I choose to remember Jack as he really was, the man who held me in our kitchen and slow danced to old Beatles songs, the man who made terrible puns and cried at Pixar movies, the man who told me I was the best thing that ever happened to him. That video was the product of a brain hijacked by drugs and manipulation, and it has no power over my memory of him anymore. I've made my peace with that, and I know, with every fiber of my being, that Jack would be proud of the woman I've become. Edit 6. To clear up the numbers, the total judgment was $300,000. After Greg's 30% contingency fee and some minor court costs, I walked away with just over $210,000. That was more than enough to change my entire trajectory. Edit 7. Yes, I still occasionally get hate mail from Rick's side of the family. His mother, Diane, sent me a handwritten letter last Christmas, 3 pages front and back, calling me a heartless witch who destroyed her son and claiming I'd twisted the legal system. I read it once, felt a brief, distant sadness, and then threw it in the recycling bin. I never respond. I'm not interested in their revisionist version of the story. I've closed that book. What would you have done? Because honestly, I don't think anyone with a shred of self-respect would have let him get away with it. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. And when they come crawling back because they need you, let them crawl right past you.